Let's start by creating a new project. Make sure you're using the version 2021 and above. It will be a 3D project and I'm going to call it Multiplayer Course Project. Now after we created the project, we need to actually set up Photon PUN 2. To set up Photon, we need to go into the asset store and download it. You can find a link to this website in the resources next to this lecture. Now, in here search for Photon. Make sure you toggle free assets only. And now if you scroll a bit, you can find Photon 2 free. Let's download it and import it into Unity. You can see that a window popped up, saying we need to create an app ID. To set up an app ID, we need to go into photonengine.com. You can also find a link to this website in the resources. Before we set an app ID, we need to actually sign in into the website. After you went through the sign-in process, we can actually create an app. Set a photon type to PUN, and give it your application a name. We don't need any description or URL, just click create. And now you can find there an app ID. Make sure you don't share it with anyone, because then they can manage and get access to your application settings. Copy it and we need to paste it into Unity. Now here we can actually set up our project. And that's actually it. For now, we have everything we need to build our multiplayer game. Let's talk about servers and ping, in the case of multiplayer game development. First, what even is a server? Server is a computer with very high processing and storage power. Servers are built to store and manage network data. When a player does something in a multiplayer game, this information passes through the server back to the player's computer. Let's take a look at an example. Say that I am a player in a multiplayer game. When I log into the game, I am searching for the closest server to my location. In my case, it's a server in Europe. When the closest server is found, I am joining to that server. You can see that a number pops up next to the server name, and this number is called ping, and it's calculated in milliseconds. That means 65 milliseconds is 0.065 seconds. Ping is the calculation of time that it takes for data to travel through my computer to the server and back to me. That whole process takes 65 milliseconds in the case of Europe. But you can see that in other servers it may be different because they are more far away than me. My closest server is EU, but for you it may be different because we live in a different location. Anyway, that's servers and ping in a nutshell. So let's create our loading menu. In the scenes, first of all I will rename the sample scene name to loading. To actually make the loading UI, we need to create a new canvas. And let's change the game aspect to 16:9. 16:9 is the normal aspect ratio of screens in the current days. And in the canvas, let's change the UI scale mode to scale with screen size. And the X will be 1080, the Y will be 1920. And our canvas will scale correctly with any monitor. Now let's actually create the UI. So I create a new UI text using Text Mesh Pro. We'll need to import it. The text will be loading with 3 dots. We'll make it a bit bigger, something like 80. And we'll scale it to fit our middle. Also here we need to center it in the alignment. And for now that's it. But it looks pretty bad because the default skybox is still currently on. So let's find a better skybox in the asset store. If we search for sky, you can see the free all sky skybox set. And it's actually really cool. It comes with a lot of different skies to fit our game. So let's download it and import it. It also imports some demo scenes, but they take up a lot of storage, so just disable them one by one. Just before we find the skybox, I want to tidy up all the projects panel here. So let's create a new folder called Assets. And we'll drag the All Sky, Photon and Text Mesh Pro into it. Now we can actually find a better skybox than the default one. I think this one looks pretty good. If you want to customize it a bit more, you can see the settings we have here, like tint color, exposure and rotation. Sometimes I move the rotation so the sun won't be in the center, but for now I think I will leave it at the default one. Now it's looking pretty cool, but we can't really see the text right here. So let's create a black background, so the text will be more clear. I will call it BG image. And let's actually rename the text to loading text. Let's fit the image across the entire screen. And we'll make it black. We can't see the text at all, so let's drag the loading text below the BG image, and now we can actually see it. and I will make the opacity of the background a bit lower, somewhere around 160, and I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, for now I'm fine with it. Of course you can improve or change everything you like to make the loading menu and all the other menus look like you want, but for me it's great. Now let's connect into the server. It's one of the most important things you can do in a multiplayer game, and without it we can't actually do anything. So let's create a new empty game object, and I will call it connect to server. Let's actually drag the event system into the canvas because I want the hierarchy to stay more clean. Now in the connect to server we are going to create a new script, and I will also call it connect to server. We currently have just a script sitting in a project bar, so let's create a new folder. I'm going to call it scripts, and we'll drag the connect to server script into it. And now let's open it up in Visual Studio. Let's delete the update method and this text right here, and also those namespaces above. Because we are using Photon to create our game, we need to use its namespace. So write using Photon.PUN. With Photon, joining a server is really easy. To actually do that, all we need to do is to search for Photon Network, and we are going to search for connect using settings. This method alone will connect us into the server of Photon. And that's actually all we need to do to connect the server. But we're going to improve that by printing a message when the players actually join the server. To do that, we need to replace the mono behavior with mono behavior PUN callbacks. This will allow us to use methods called override methods. For example, if you're going to search for public override void, in here you can see unconnected to master, and this method is called when the client is connected to the master server and ready for matchmaking. We're going to replace this default text with debug.log, and we will write here, we are connected into the server, semicolon. If you're confused by what master is, it's basically just another word for server. Server has a lot of names, so if you come across a name like region or master, know it means server. Now let's save it and go back into Unity and play our game. You can see in the console we are connected into the server, and it's really exciting because we are. You can't really see what happened, but if you want to understand the details behind it, we can actually do that. So in the assets, Photon, and the resources, you find here the Photon server settings file. And in here the PUN logging is set to errors only. But if we will set it to full and play the game, we'll get a lot more information about what's happening in the background. Back in the console you can see PUN got region list going to ping minimum regions based on the result summary. And then we are connected to the EU server, and finally the text we created, we are connected into the server. I will leave it to errors only because I don't want our console to be spammed, but this is actually really useful and tells what's happening in the background. The Photon region list is a list of servers that Photon has across all over the world. So if you go into this website, you can find it in the resources next to this lecture, and scroll down a bit, you can find all the regions that Photon has across the world. And currently my player is connected to the region in Europe that is actually hosted in Amsterdam. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always ask me in the Q&A down below. So that's really cool, we are connected into the server, and we can do much more things from now on. After we connected into the server, we actually need to join a lobby. Lobby is kind of a place where in it you can create or leave rooms. And room is where the game is basically happening. So it's really important to actually join the lobby. We are going to join it by using Photon Network .join lobby. Really simple. And we are going to do something very similar to what we did in the previous lecture, an override method. In it, we're going to search for public override void on joined lobby. And after we join the lobby, I want us to load the scene called lobby. Instead of using just scene manager.load scene, because we are making a multiplayer game, we need to use Photon. So I'm going to say Photon Network .load level lobby. And it's exactly the same like doing the scene manager one, just now we are doing it with Photon. Back in Unity, let's actually create this scene. So I'm going to create a new scene, and I'm going to call it lobby. Make sure you spell it just like you spell it in the code one. Now what it's left to do is to add the lobby scene to the build settings as well as the loading scene. Just the loading scene must come before the lobby one, So when we actually start the game, we go into the loading before we go into the lobby. Now, the lobby scene is currently empty, but actually there's a thing for your first challenge. Throughout this course you're going to have a few challenges, and this is the first one. In this challenge you will need to create a special lobby menu. You can find here an example for what we're going to create by the end of this lecture. But I really encourage you to customize and make your own unique looking lobby UI. Just make sure you add the welcome text, the name input field, create/join room button, and the quit button. But if you like what you see on the screen and you don't really want to change it, let's continue. Let's start by changing our skybox to something a bit prettier than the default one. I'm gonna go with this one. Let's create a new canvas. And we scale it with screen size by 1080 and 1920, just like we did in the loading scene. And let's drag the event system into the canvas. I want the background to stay like we did in the loading scene, so let's actually copy this BG image and paste it inside of our canvas. The first element that I want to add is a text that says welcome to the lobby, so the player knows where it is. So let's create a new UI text, and I will call it welcome text. We'll say here welcome to the lobby. We're going to make it bigger, something like 80. And we'll put it here. I will center it and maybe even add some underline. And finally, let's put the anchor in the correct position. Now let's create the input field. So UI, input field, and I will call it name field. This is the place where the player is going to write his nickname. Let's make it bigger. And change the placeholder text to enter nickname. Okay, that's pretty good. What we'll have to do is to add two more buttons, and that is the create or join room button and the quit button. Let's go to UI button, and I will call it join button. We'll put it just below the input field and change the text to something like create/join room. And of course, let's make it smaller. The final element we need to add is the quit button. So exactly what we did in the join button. I want it to be a bit smaller than the previous button. And I'm going to make the text quit. Font size maybe 20. Okay, I think that's looking great. But the last thing that I want to add is maybe in the text. Let's make it a bit more special by adding some underlay. You can change the offset a bit, something like 0.45, the offset Y to 0.08, and we'll leave it as 0. Of course you can change the color to what we want, and maybe it's white, maybe it's red, but I want to leave it as black. And that's it. We finally finished with the UI. It's the part in game development that I mostly dislike, but just in the next lecture I'm going to actually create and join rooms, and this will be really cool. Once I logged into the lobby, I want to join a room. A room is the place where the game is basically happening, so it's really important to actually join it. If I am not the first player who joined the game, I will be able to just join a room and start playing. But if I am the first player who joined the game, I wouldn't be able to join a room, because currently there aren't anyone open. So what we'll do in this situation is to actually create a room by ourselves, and we'll join it and start playing. Let's make it work in Unity. So let's create a new empty game object called Lobby Manager. We're going to add a script to it called Lobby Manager as well. And let's drag the script into the scripts folder. We are going to use the namespace photon.pun. And we are going to create a method from our own. It will be a public void method. And we are going to call it join or create room. We're going to call this method when we press on the create or join room button in the lobby. What we will write in here is going to be photon network dot join random room. And this is the part where we are trying to check if there's currently any open room or we need to create it by ourselves. Let's change the mono behavior to mono behavior PUN callbacks. And now we can search for public override void. and we're going to search for onJoinRandom field. Make sure you entered onJoinRandom field and not onJoinRoom field. It's really important because it's not the correct method. In the onJoinRandom field, we are going to write PhotonNetwork.createRoom. And that is basically the presentation that I showed you before, where we are trying to join a room, and if we are not the first player, we will actually join it. But if we are the first player, then we're going to create this room by ourselves. Currently, we have an error. That's because we didn't enter the room name. I'm actually going to leave it as null, because I don't want the room to have any name. But we are still not done, because if you want, you can actually change the room options. And room options is pretty important. So let's say that I want to create a room which has a maximum players number. For example, 2. We can actually make it in here. But if we want to use room options, we actually need to create a new namespace called using photon.realtime. Now we can continue. So, new room options, open brackets, max players equals, for example, 2. And that's it. You can set it to whatever you want. So it can be 2, 5, or even no max players at all, so everyone can join the same room. It's up to you. Last thing that I want to do is search for public override void, and we are going to search for onJoined room. And what we're going to do once we actually join the room, and by the way, this method is called after we created the room and also after we joined the random room, so it will work for both of these options. After we join the room, I want to load the level game, just like we did between the loading and the lobby scenes. So that is PhotonNetwork.loadLevel, and we're going to write in here game. The final thing we need to do is to actually make this game scene. So we go into scenes, create scene, and make sure it's spelled the same as the code. And of course, final touch, edit the build settings. And now let's go to the loading scene and test the game. We can write your name, and let's join the room. Right now it's not working because we actually forgot to add the script that we just created into the join button. So the action here, I'm going to drag the lobby manager and call the join or create room method that we created in the start of our script right here. Like in Unity, now everything should work. So we load, we write our name. Fantastic, that's exactly what we want and it works perfectly. Right now it's really empty, but in the next lecture we are actually going to create an environment and set it up here. So let's find a nice environment. I will search for city, a free one, and in here you can find some destroyed city, new city, and actually they all look great, so just find what you like and import it. I think I'm gonna go with the destroyed city one. And of course, I encourage you to choose a different environment than what I pick. Anyway, let's import it. So just click yes for these and other files that might be fine later. And now let's just add the terrain and the destroyed city into the assets folder. Great, now let's actually make the environment of our game. So let's go into destroyed city, scenes, and let's open the destroyed city demo. This looks great, but let's actually play it. You can see that everything looks pretty good, but if we toggle the stats here, our FPS is really low. So let's make it better. First of all, I don't need this daylight water. I don't need the Tosca. The work is really important, but the wind zone not so much. But for now I will leave the first person controller here. Let's play it again. And you can see that just straight up we doubled our FPS. My computer is kind of in the middle between high and low, but maybe for you the FPS will be higher or lower. So let's improve this in. First of all, I will create a new empty game object called environment. And I will change the working name to buildings. Let's drag the buildings and terrain into this environment. And actually we can delete the first person controller. Now this environment is really cool, but I think it's a bit too small for our game. Let's copy the buildings and the terrain. We can actually just duplicate it and move it like this. And I think that is working pretty well. Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Just we have some overlap in the terrain. So let's make sure this one is just a bit higher, like make it 92. So just imagine two spaceships racing around here, and I think it will be pretty cool. And for the building, that's it. Let's see what else we can upload. I think we can switch the skybox to something a bit better, like this. I think that's better, but the sun is not really in the correct position, so let's drag the directional light and we'll move it where the sun actually is. Okay, I'm going to click on game object and align with view. Awesome. Now the last thing we need to add is actually a camera, so I'm going to right click and create here a new camera. Now the only thing that's missing is a sun flare to the camera, because in the game we don't see any sun flare, but in the scene view we actually do see it. So in my camera I'm going to add a flare layer, and now we actually see the sun. Now that's everything for this lecture. In the next one we're actually going to make the spaceship fly around here, and it will be really cool. So let's find a spaceship model for our game. I'm going to search for spaceship 3D model 3. Let's go into CG Trader. All of them look really cool, but I think I'm gonna go with this one. It actually looks pretty awesome and you have different colors. So let's download it. And make sure you're logged in. Let's download the first option. Let's extract it and rename it to Spaceship. Now we can actually drag this Spaceship folder into the Assets folder in Unity. You can see that you have here different types of models. If you want, you can actually make it bigger and zoom in. I think I'm gonna go with this one. Just drag it into the scene. And now we have it. Currently it's gray because we don't have any texture into it. So let's unpack this model. And I'm going to call it Spaceship. And now let's actually add the textures. So in my assets, Spaceship, textures, you can see that we have here different types of textures. We have a black one, a blue one, a red one. And I actually think the red one is looking the best. We can add some more detail into the spaceship by adding a normal map. So I'm going to toggle this little arrow here, and we're going to add a normal map. So just drag this purple ugly looking thing into this slot here. And now we have a lot more detail. You can see just how much by pressing on Ctrl Z and Ctrl Y. And in my opinion, it looks much better when you have a normal map. I'm going to click on Fix Now. And that's it. If you want to customize it a bit more, you can actually adjust the variable here that says 1. This is 0. 1 is what I'm going to go with, but if you want, you can actually make it like 3, and it looks much more metallic and really good. But if you want it to look even more metallic, you can actually do that by adding the metallic texture. So this is this one. I will drag it in here, and you can see that now it's looking really, well, metallic. It's not really the style that I'm going for, but if you want it to look like this, you absolutely can. For me, I'm going to leave it as none. Fantastic. Now let's actually make the spaceship fly. So first of all, into the spaceship I'm going to add a rigid body. And also I'm going to add a mesh collider. Because we have rigid body, so we need to set the mesh collider to convex. And now we can actually see here the green arrows tells us this is the collider. Now if we play the game, we are supposed to see the spaceship fall into the ground. So let's find our camera and put our spaceship right in front of it by clicking Move to View. Okay, let's press on play. You can see that the spaceship is falling into the ground and then colliding with the terrain. Now in the resources, download the folder called Multiplayer Course Essential Scripts. In the Multiplayer Course Essential Scripts folder, you can find a spaceship controller and a camera controller. And both of those scripts will really help us continue with the game. So in my spaceship I will add this component. Let's actually disable all of those. And in my camera I'm going to add this camera controller. The object to follow is supposed to be the spaceship, so let's drag it in here. And now we can actually play and this will work. But actually, it's time for a second challenge. Your challenge is to adjust the variables as you'd like adjusting the spaceship controller variable to feel more intuitive, like doing faster acceleration, faster turns, and something like that. And in the camera, you can make it feel smoother, like adjusting the velocity, the follow bias, and basically all the variables. So really make it feel like you want it to feel. Maybe it's fast, maybe it's slow, but I really encourage you to change the variable and make it feel like you want it to feel. Let's actually press and play and see what will happen. So I can actually play with the spaceship using the WASD keys or the arrow keys. It's pretty fast right now, so like I said, you can adjust the variables as you'd like. You can see that if the spaceship collides into a building, the rotation changes really quickly. So let's actually freeze the rotation in the rigid body of the spaceship. So go to Constraints, and here you can freeze the rotation of the X, the Y, and the Z. And the last thing you maybe want to change is when you press on the W or the up arrow key, so you actually move up, but maybe you want it to move down, because in the real life, the spacesuit is actually inverted in the axis, so W should move down and S should move up. If you want to change it, so go into Edit, Project Settings, Input Manager, and toggle the axis. Go to the vertical and click on Invert. Now when you play the game, the controls are inverted. Anyway, that's it for this lecture. We did quite a lot, so well done for you. Now let's actually instantiate the player when we start the game. So let's create a new game object called Spawn Manager. And we have a script called Spawn Manager as well. And of course, let's drag it to the scripts folder. Great, let's open it up in Visual Studio. We are only going to need the start method, so we can just delete those namespaces and the update method right here, as well as the text. And when we start the game, we want to instantiate our player prefab. So let's start by making a reference to it. And we write here public game object, and this will be our player prefab. And in the start method, we are going to use Photon Network once again. So we are going to use the namespace using photon.pun. And now in the start, we can use Photon Network.instantiate. It's really similar to the normal instantiate, but just this one is going to sync in the network. So we're going to instantiate the player prefab. We're going to need to say .name, because you can see that Photon Network.instantiate takes a string. We'll continue by saying transform.position and transform.rotation. They just mean the 0 position and the 0 rotation of the Spawn Manager game object. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always ask me in the Q&A down below. So let's save it and go back to Unity. We need to drag the player prefab, and now we can play. You can see that we have here an error that says cannot instantiate before the client joined and created the room. So we have to go back into the loading scene and go through all this process. And currently the game scene is not a scene that we are working on. So let's go to the assets, and we're going to find the demo scene that we work on and rename it to game 1 for now. Let's drag it into the scenes folder, and now we can delete the normal game scene and rename it to game. Everything is good. Let's just add it to the build settings. And we're going to delete this one. Okay. Let's go back to loading and play. We'll write here a name and join a room. And you notice we still get here an error, actually 2 errors. But the first one say the prefab player must be in the resources folder. It's actually really simple. Photon can only instantiate prefabs that are located in the folder called resources. So remember in your future games to add all the prefabs that you make into a folder called resources. We're going to spell it with a capital R, and we'll drag the player into the resources folder. Let's test it again. And we still get here an error. This error says can only instantiate prefabs with a Photon view component on them. This prefab does not have one player. So the errors are really straightforward, and Photon made it really easy for us to debug. So let's go into the folder resources, find our player, and in here just add the Photon view component. We are not going to touch any of the variables, just play it again. And you can see that it actually worked. Our player is instantiated and we are playing in the game scene. Now it's time for the first multiplayer test. So to actually test our game in multiplayer, we are going to need to build it. So let's go to File, Build Settings, and to the Player Settings. In here I just want to set the full screen mode to windowed. We are going to make it a bit smaller, something like 800 and 450. That just means the window will be smaller. Now we can actually build and run the game. I will create a new folder called Builds. Because it's a multiplayer game, we need to actually allow the access. And now we have our window of the game. That's really great. I recommend you pin it to the taskbar like this, so it will be easier for you to playtest the game in the future. I'm going to write a nickname here. I'm going to call it right, and this will be left. Now let's create and join the room here, and the same thing here. And you can see that it's not really working, but we still see each other, and it's kind of good. Anyway, if I'm going to close this tab, you see that the player changes. So we have here a lot of bugs. For now we're going to ignore these bugs, but don't worry, we're going to fix them later. So let's open our lobby manager script. We're going to create an action when the player presses on the quit button, it's actually going to quit the game. So let's create a new public void. I'm going to call it quit game. And let's say application.quit. It won't work in the Unity editor, but when we actually build the app, it's going to work. So let's save it, go into Unity, and in the lobby scene, let's attach the lobby manager here, and we're going to call this function. Great. Back in our script, I want the player to only join a room if he actually enters a nickname. It's enough to only enter one letter, so let's actually make it happen. First of all, I will need to reference the username input field, so I need to use TMP Pro. And now we can actually reference it by saying public TMP input field username input field. Great. Now, when we are joining or creating a room, this is where I'm going to check. So we are going to say if username input field dot text dot length is greater or equals to 1, only then we are going to try to join a room. But just before we are trying to join a room, let's actually save this username into our own nickname of the player. So to actually do this, we need to use photonetwork.nickname, and it will be equal to username input field dot text. Now let's save it and go back into Unity. Don't forget to add the name input field into the lobby manager. And now let's go into the loading scene and test the game. So if I'm trying to join the room without writing anything, I wouldn't be able to do that. If I'm going to write even one letter or number, I will be able to join the game, but we can't really see the name of the player that we entered.